During Christmas dinner at my son's house, a sudden violent wave of nausea forced me out of my chair. I just needed a glass of water and my heart medication. But what I saw through the cracked kitchen door made me slowly reach into my pocket and dial 911. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to trust your gut when your own family tried to convince you that you were losing your mind. My name is Rick Sullivan. I am 70 years old, and I spent 40 years of my life turning dust and gravel into a commercial real estate empire. I built my life on hard facts, solid foundations, and a sharp mind. But sitting at the long, polished oak dining table in my son Brad's sprawling mansion in the Chicago suburbs, I felt like a stranger in my own life. The house was a monument to superficiality. Brad is 36, the CEO of a tech startup that produced a lot of buzzwords but very little actual revenue. Yet here he was, living in a $5 million home in one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in Illinois. The dining room was suffocatingly perfect. Crystal glasses clinked. Silverware scraped against expensive porcelain plates. A professionally decorated Christmas tree stood in the corner, sparkling with silver and gold ornaments that perfectly matched the carefully curated aesthetic of his wife. Megan, my 33-year-old daughter-in-law, was playing the role of the perfect hostess. She poured expensive wine, laughed at all the right moments, and constantly placed a manicured hand on Brad's shoulder. To anyone looking through the frosty windows from the outside, we were the picture of American success and holiday joy. But inside, the air was thin, cold, and heavy with unspoken expectations and hidden resentments. I tried to focus on Brad's voice. He was bragging to Megan's parents about his latest round of venture capital funding, tossing around technology jargon that I knew was just smoke and mirrors. I wanted to ask him hard questions about his burn rate, about his actual profit margins, but I could not find the words. Literally. It started with a dull ache at the base of my skull. Then, without warning, a terrifying wave of nausea washed over me. It was not just an upset stomach. It felt chemical, violent, and deeply wrong. My heart began to hammer against my ribs like a trapped bird. The rhythm was erratic, entirely out of sync. It felt as though the blood pumping through my veins had turned to ice water. I squeezed my eyes shut for a second, gripping the heavy linen napkin on my lap. The dining room, with its bright chandelier and laughing guests, began to spin wildly. The voices around me warped, sounding like they were coming from deep underwater. I tried to take a deep breath, but my chest felt incredibly tight, as if an invisible iron band was slowly crushing my lungs. I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead and the back of my neck. This was not the first time. For the past 3 months, these episodes had been attacking me out of nowhere. The severe dizziness, the sudden terrifying brain fog, the humiliating moments where I would walk into a room and completely forget where I was or what I was doing. I was a man who used to memorize complex architectural blueprints and vast financial portfolios with absolute ease. Now my own body and mind were turning against me, betraying the very foundation of who I was. Fear is a very strange thing. I had faced ruthless competitors, devastating economic crashes, and hostile contractors without ever blinking. But this internal betrayal terrified me to my absolute core. My doctors had gently mentioned the word dementia. They talked about rapid onset cognitive decline. Every time my hands trembled, every time the room spun, I felt my hard-earned independence slipping away. Brad and Megan had been so overly attentive lately, constantly hovering around me, constantly suggesting that I was becoming a danger to myself. Megan kept leaving glossy brochures for luxury assisted living facilities on my kitchen counter, claiming she was just looking out for my future. Brad kept pushing me to sign over full power of attorney, saying it was just a standard precaution but for my own safety and the protection of the family assets. Sitting at that Christmas dinner, bathed in cold sweat and fighting the urge to vomit, their manipulative words echoed loudly in my fading mind. Was I truly losing it? Was this the end of Rick Sullivan? Was I destined to become a helpless, confused old man, trapped in a failing body, while my son took over everything I had built from nothing? A sharp, sudden pain shot down my left arm. I gasped, softly opening my eyes. No one had noticed my distress. Megan was too busy showing off her new diamond tennis bracelet to her mother, and Brad was proudly pouring another glass of imported red wine. I looked down at my own hands. They were shaking uncontrollably against the dark wood of the table. The edges of my vision started to blur, creeping in with dark, ominous shadows. I knew I desperately needed my medication. My cardiologist had prescribed a very specific, very expensive heart capsule to manage my irregular palpitations, but I had left the plastic bottle in my heavy winter coat pocket, which was hanging over a chair in the kitchen. I pushed my chair back slowly. The wooden legs scraped loudly against the polished marble floor, cutting sharply through the polite chatter. Brad paused mid-sentence, turning to look at me with a perfectly practiced look of deep concern. "Are you all right, Dad?" Brad asked, his voice smooth and deliberately loud enough for everyone at the table to hear clearly. "You look a little pale. Do you need to go lie down in the guest room again?" His tone was horribly patronizing. It was the exact voice you use to speak to a frightened, fragile toddler, not a grown man. It grated on my last remaining nerve, fueling a tiny spark of anger that cut through the physical pain. "I am fine," I managed to say, though my voice sounded incredibly weak and raspy, completely devoid of its usual commanding authority. "I just need a glass of cold water. I am going to the kitchen for a moment. Let me get it for you, Rick." Megan chimed in immediately, standing up quickly, her expensive silk dress rustling in the quiet room. "You really should not be walking around alone if you are having another one of your dizzy spells." "No." I raised a trembling hand, putting as much force into the single word as my failing lungs would allow. "I can get my own water, Megan. Please just continue your dinner." I did not wait for her response. I turned away from the table, gripping the high back of my chair for a brief second to steady my shaking legs. The long hallway leading from the dining room to the kitchen felt like it was miles long. Every step I took was a massive battle against gravity. My vision swam, and the expensive framed artwork on the walls blurred into meaningless streaks of color. My breath came in shallow, ragged gasps. I just needed to reach the granite island, grab my pills from my coat, and swallow them down. I desperately hoped the medication would clear the fog in my brain, stop the violent hammering in my chest, and give me back my dignity before I collapsed in front of my guests. I leaned heavily against the cool plaster wall as I approached the kitchen doors. They were classic swinging double wooden doors, currently pushed almost entirely shut to hide the catering mess from the dining room. The faint hum of the massive luxury refrigerator and the soft glow of the under-cabinet lighting spilled out through the narrow crack between the doors. I reached out a shaking hand to push the heavy door open, desperate for physical relief, desperate for a brief moment of quiet isolation to pull myself together. But as my fingers brushed the cold wood, I paused. I looked through the narrow crack into the bright kitchen, and the terrifying physical pain in my chest was instantly replaced by a cold, paralyzing, and absolute shock. Through that narrow gap between the heavy wooden doors, the bright, sterile light of the kitchen cut across my face. My breathing was incredibly shallow, every inhale burning my lungs, but the sheer disbelief freezing my veins forced me to stand completely still. Megan had not stayed in the dining room. She must have slipped through the adjoining dining room pantry the moment I turned my back, moving with a quiet, desperate speed to beat me here. She was standing at the far end of the massive white marble island, her back turned completely toward me. My heavy wool winter coat, the one I had draped over a bar stool earlier that evening, was now pulled close to her. One of her manicured hands was buried deep inside my coat pocket. I watched my heart hammering a frantic, irregular rhythm against my ribs as she pulled out the familiar amber plastic bottle that contained my prescribed heart capsules. My chest tightened not just from the physical ailment that was currently ravaging my body, but from a sudden sharp spike of adrenaline. My vision was still slightly blurry, yet I could see her actions with absolute clarity. The expensive diamond bracelet on her wrist caught the light as she moved. Why was my daughter-in-law digging through my personal belongings in the middle of a Christmas dinner? I leaned closer to the crack in the door, holding my breath, so she would not hear the ragged wheezing of my lungs. The kitchen was perfectly quiet, save for the low hum of the expensive refrigerator and the faint, muffled sounds of laughter drifting down the hallway from the dining room. Megan placed the amber bottle onto the bright white marble surface. She moved with a practiced, terrifying precision. This was not a rushed, frantic action. This was a routine. She reached into the pocket of her elegant silk dress and pulled out a small, dark glass vial along with a slender medical syringe. The needle caught the harsh overhead kitchen light, gleaming with a cold metallic sharpness that made my stomach churn violently. My mind, previously clouded by the strange, suffocating brain fog that had been plaguing me for months, suddenly snapped into a terrifyingly sharp focus. The fog parted, replaced by a chilling, undeniable clarity. Every symptom I had experienced, the dizziness, the memory loss, the sudden physical weakness, flashed through my mind. She pressed down on the child-proof cap of the amber bottle, twisted it smoothly, and poured a few of my capsules onto the clean counter. These were specialized extended-release capsules, the kind made of 2 interlocking gelatin halves, holding the medication inside. Megan set the bottle down and picked up the syringe. She inserted the thin needle through the rubber stopper of the dark glass vial and pulled back the plunger. A clear, slightly viscous liquid filled the plastic barrel of the syringe. It was completely colorless. It looked exactly like water, but the methodical, secretive way she handled it screamed that it was something far more dangerous. I watched her tap the side of the syringe with her perfectly painted fingernail, clearing a tiny air bubble from the chamber, just like a trained nurse would. Then she picked up one of my heart capsules. Holding it delicately between her thumb and index finger, she applied a tiny amount of pressure and twisted. The capsule popped open, separating into 2 neat halves. She did not empty the life-saving medication inside. Instead, she brought the needle of the syringe right to the edge of the powder-filled bottom half. With a slow, steady push of her thumb, she injected a few drops of the clear liquid directly into the medicinal powder. The powder absorbed the liquid, instantly darkening only slightly before returning to its normal appearance. It was a flawless, invisible contamination. Once the drops were absorbed, she carefully picked up the top half of the gelatin capsule and slid it back over the bottom half, pressing them together until they clicked securely into place. She picked up a small microfiber cloth from the counter and meticulously wiped the outside of the newly sealed capsule, ensuring no residue or moisture was left behind that might give away her tampering. She dropped the poisoned capsule back into the amber bottle. Without missing a single beat, she picked up the next capsule and repeated the exact same horrifying process. Twist the gelatin shell open, inject the clear, unknown liquid into the powder, snap the capsule shut, wipe it clean, drop it back into the bottle. She was poisoning my medication. She was poisoning me. The woman who smiled at me, who bought me Christmas gifts, who claimed to worry about my deteriorating mental health, was standing in her beautiful, festive kitchen, methodically preparing to destroy my mind and my body. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. The panic attacks, the sudden inability to remember simple details, the physical tremors that made me look like a fragile, failing old man. It was not dementia. It was not the natural decay of a 70-year-old body. It was a deliberate, malicious, and incredibly calculated act of violence against me. It was this. It was whatever clear liquid she was pumping into my daily medication. My blood boiled. The weakness in my legs vanished, replaced by a surge of pure, unadulterated fury. The intense chest pain that had driven me from the dining table was completely overshadowed by the burning desire to stop her. I did not care about the physical toll on my body anymore. I did not care about playing the polite father-in-law. I placed both of my trembling hands flat against the heavy wooden swinging doors and pushed them open with all the strength I could muster. The hinges creaked loudly, breaking the tense silence of the kitchen. I stepped out of the shadows of the hallway and directly into the harsh, unforgiving overhead light. Megan froze instantly. Her shoulders went completely rigid. She did not turn around immediately. She stood perfectly still like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming truck, the syringe still hovering in her hand over the marble island. I took another heavy step forward, my shoes clicking sharply against the polished floor tiles. The sheer rage vibrating through my chest made my voice completely steady. "What the hell are you doing to my medication?" I asked, my voice dangerously low and echoing off the pristine white walls. Megan let out a sharp, terrified gasp. She spun around, her eyes wide with absolute horror. Her fingers lost their grip. The plastic syringe slipped from her hand and dropped clattering loudly against the solid marble countertop before rolling to a stop near my pill bottle. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She stared at me, trembling. Before I could take a step to demand an answer, the heavy wooden door on the opposite side of the kitchen swung wide open and hit the wall. Brad stepped into the room, holding an empty glass in his hand, completely unaware of the scene he was walking into. Brad stepped into the room, holding an empty glass in his hand, completely unaware of the scene he was walking into. He froze just a few steps past the threshold. He looked at me, standing rigid by the swinging doors, and then his gaze shifted to his wife. The clatter of the plastic syringe hitting the marble island seemed to echo endlessly in the silent room. For a fraction of a second, the kitchen was suspended in an agonizing stillness. Then the performance began. Megan did not simply explain herself. She collapsed. Her shoulders hitched, her face crumpled into a mask of absolute devastation, and a piercing sob tore from her throat. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently under her expensive silk dress. It was an instant, seamless transition from a cold, calculating predator to a fragile, misunderstood victim. The sheer speed of the transformation was terrifying to witness. Brad dropped his empty glass on the nearest counter and rushed to her side. He wrapped his arms around her trembling frame, pulling her close, his face etched with sudden alarm. He demanded to know what was wrong and what had happened. Megan pointed a shaking finger at the counter, her voice hitching with expertly timed gasps. She cried that she was only trying to help me, that she could not bear to see me fading away right in front of their eyes. Through a torrent of dramatic tears, she told Brad that the liquid in the dark glass vial was just a high concentration of liquid vitamin B12. She claimed she had purchased it from an exclusive holistic wellness clinic downtown. She sobbed that I was far too stubborn to ever accept a new daily supplement, that I always dismissed her concerns about my health, and that she felt this was the only way to get the vital nutrients into my failing system. She painted herself as the desperate, loving daughter-in-law who was forced to sneak vitamins into my prescription medication just to save my life. Brad tightened his grip on her and turned his head to glare at me. The look of concern on his face vanished completely, replaced instantly by a glaring, aggressive hostility. He did not ask for my side of the story. He did not question why his wife was conducting secretive chemistry experiments in their kitchen with a medical syringe. Instead, he unleashed a barrage of verbal assaults aimed directly at my sanity. He took a threatening step forward, raising his voice so loudly it bordered on a shout. He told me I was completely out of line, that my behavior was erratic and deeply offensive. He pointed his finger at my chest, weaponizing every single moment of weakness I had displayed over the past 3 months. He reminded me of the time I forgot where I parked my car, the afternoon I lost my train of thought during a simple conversation, and the frequent dizzy spells that left me leaning against the walls for support. He threw those vulnerable moments back in my face with a brutal, crushing precision. He told me my mind was rapidly deteriorating, that the doctors had warned them this would happen, and that I was now suffering from severe paranoid delusions. He said it was incredibly common for dementia patients to suddenly believe their loved ones were trying to harm them. He called my reaction a textbook symptom of my failing brain. His voice dripped with a toxic mixture of pity and condescension. He insisted that Megan was the only person caring enough to take an active interest in my well-being, while I was acting like a terrified, confused old man chasing imaginary shadows. He demanded that I apologize to his wife immediately. He warned me that if I continued down this path of baseless paranoia, he would have no choice but to step in and make the difficult medical decisions for me. He was openly threatening to take control of my life, using my fabricated illness as the perfect justification. I stood perfectly still, letting his harsh words wash over me like freezing rain. For one fleeting, terrifying second, a heavy blanket of doubt threatened to smother my thoughts. Was he right? Was my brain simply fabricating a nightmare out of a misunderstanding? The symptoms were real, the confusion was real, and the fear was certainly real. My chest continued to ache, a dull, throbbing pain that served as a constant reminder of my physical vulnerability. The kitchen lights felt blindingly bright, illuminating the flawless facade of their domestic bliss. The granite countertops, the stainless steel appliances, the imported tiles, everything around me projected an image of success and safety. It was maddeningly disorienting to stand in the heart of my son's beautiful home and feel like prey trapped in a cage. But the instinct that had kept me alive and thriving in the cutthroat world of commercial real estate for 4 decades finally kicked in. My mind pushed past the fatigue and the terrible nausea, anchoring itself to cold, hard facts. I refused to let his psychological manipulation break my grip on reality. I slowly lowered my gaze and looked past his pointing finger, focusing entirely on the syringe resting on the marble counter. I looked at the tiny droplets of liquid clinging to the inside of the plastic barrel. My memory, the exact same memory Brad was so aggressively declaring broken, supplied a single, undeniable piece of information. I had taken liquid vitamin B12 injections years ago to combat a minor deficiency caused by stress and overwork. That simple medical fact stood between me and total mental collapse. Liquid vitamin B12 is always a bright, vivid, unmistakable shade of deep red. The liquid in that syringe, reflecting the harsh overhead lights, was completely, perfectly clear. It was definitely not a vitamin. It was a deadly poison. The realization settled over me with the heavy, suffocating weight of a solid concrete block crushing the breath from my lungs. The two people staring at me with a sickening mixture of fake tears and manufactured outrage were fully aware of that terrifying fact. They were working together in a flawless, synchronized partnership of dark deception and slow, invisible murder. The loving, successful son and the deeply caring, devoted daughter-in-law were meticulously planning my painful demise brick by brick and dose by dose. Every single loving gesture, every worried look, every quiet suggestion to see another doctor had been a carefully rehearsed step in a sinister performance designed to end my life. I realized with an icy jolt of sheer terror that I was completely isolated in their carefully guarded territory, surrounded by ruthless enemies hiding behind warm smiles and cheerful holiday decorations. There was absolutely no one coming to help me now. No one else knew the horrifying truth about the clear liquid inside that discarded syringe. If I stayed in that lavish house fighting a psychological and physical battle I was currently too weak to win, I would absolutely not survive the night. I was standing perfectly still in the absolute gravest danger of my entire long life. The silence in the kitchen stretched tight, vibrating with an unspoken, deadly intent. I looked at Brad, his jaw set in stubborn defiance, and at Megan, who was still pressing her face into his shoulder with fake sobs. Arguing with them here in this isolated fortress they had built would be a fatal error. They held all the cards. If I accused them of poisoning me, they would simply look at each other with manufactured pity and call a psychiatric ward to have me committed. They would drain my accounts and administer the final lethal dose at their leisure. I needed a way out. I needed an extraction plan that they could not control or stop without exposing their guilt. Fortunately, my body was already providing the perfect alibi for an immediate escape. The toxic substance Megan had been steadily feeding me over the past few months, combined with the sheer adrenaline of this horrifying discovery, sent a fresh, agonizing wave of pain shooting through my chest. My left arm went completely numb. I did not have to act very hard to appear as though I was collapsing. The symptoms were terrifyingly real, a chemical assault on my nervous system pushing my heart to its absolute limits. I let out a sharp, choked gasp, reaching up with a trembling hand to grip the fabric of my shirt right over my heart. My knees buckled beneath me, unable to support the sudden weight of my failing body. I allowed myself to drop heavily against the edge of the marble island. My elbow struck a pristine stack of decorative dessert plates. The delicate porcelain shattered against the hard floor with a deafening crash, sending sharp white shards sliding across the polished tiles. Brad jumped backward, pushing Megan behind him, his eyes widening in genuine surprise. This was definitely not part of their meticulously crafted plan for the evening. A loud medical emergency during their party was a disaster. I slid down the smooth surface of the kitchen cabinets, gasping loudly for air. The marble floor was freezing against my cheek as I hit the ground. I curled onto my side, clutching my chest with both hands, my breathing coming in short, ragged wheezes that sounded like tearing paper. "Dad!" Brad yelled, his voice laced with a sudden panic. He dropped to his knees beside me on the floor, his hands hovering nervously over my body, clearly unsure of what to do. Megan stood frozen by the island, staring down at me with an expression that was impossible to accurately read. Was it fear? Or was it the dark, chilling hope that the poison she had administered earlier had finally reached its fatal climax? I focused entirely on my right hand. As my body convulsed on the floor, battling the genuine toxins surging through my bloodstream, I slid my trembling fingers deep into the pocket of my tailored trousers. The cool metal of my smartphone met my fingertips. I had kept an emergency medical shortcut programmed into the side button of the device. 3 rapid clicks of the power button would bypass the lock screen, immediately dial the emergency services, and automatically activate the speakerphone. My vision was swimming violently, dark spots dancing aggressively at the edges of my sight. The physical pain was becoming genuinely overwhelming, a fiery pressure crushing my ribcage. I pressed the button through the thin fabric of my pants. 1, 2, 3. A small vibration buzzed against my leg, confirming that the emergency call was connecting. Brad leaned closer, grabbing my shoulder and shaking me roughly. "Dad, look at me. What is happening to you?" "Megan, get his pills from the counter. Give them to him now." Megan moved toward the amber bottle, the very bottle she had just contaminated with the clear liquid. Her hand reached out, her fingers extending to grasp the plastic container. If she managed to give me another tainted pill right now while my heart was already failing, it would undoubtedly be the end. Before her fingers could brush the plastic bottle, a loud, crisp, and unmistakable voice echoed from my pocket, cutting sharply through the chaotic noise of the kitchen. 911, what is your emergency?" The dispatcher's voice rang out sharp, clear, and highly authoritative, amplified by the phone's speaker setting. Brad pulled his hands away from my shoulder, as if my skin had caught fire. He stumbled backward, his dress shoes slipping slightly on the marble floor. Megan gasped, snatching her hand back from the counter and taking a step away from the contaminated pills. Her eyes darted frantically toward my pocket, wide with horror. The sheer terror etched into their faces was a profound validation of my survival instincts. They had entirely lost control of the situation. The invisible murder they had been orchestrating in the shadows had suddenly been dragged into the bright, unyielding light of a recorded emergency call. "Hello," the dispatcher repeated, her voice carrying a professional urgency. "We have an emergency alert from this location. Are you in need of medical assistance?" I forced myself to speak, ensuring my voice sounded weak, trembling, and terrified, guaranteeing my words were captured forever on the official recorded line. "Chest pain. Severe chest pain. Please help me. I am having a heart attack." I managed to rattle off their street address between ragged breaths, making absolutely certain the authorities knew exactly where to send the ambulance. "Help is on the way, sir," the dispatcher assured me quickly. "Stay on the line. The paramedics have been dispatched to your location. Is there anyone else with you who can unlock the front door?" "My son," I gasped out, looking directly up at Brad. My son is here. He will open the door. Brad stood frozen, his chest heaving. He looked wildly at Megan, who was staring back at him with silent, mounting panic. They were trapped. They could not stop the paramedics from coming. They could not cancel the call without looking incredibly suspicious, and they certainly could not let me die on the kitchen floor while the dispatcher listened to my final breaths. They were completely cornered. "Go!" Megan hissed at him, her voice barely a whisper yet trembling with suppressed fury. "Go open the front door before they break it down." Brad turned and sprinted out of the kitchen, his heavy footsteps pounding frantically down the hallway toward the grand foyer. Within minutes, the wail of sirens pierced the quiet, snowy night of the wealthy suburb. The red and white flashing lights reflected off the frost-covered windows of the kitchen, casting a chaotic, urgent glow across the white marble countertops. Heavy boots thumped rapidly through the front door and down the hallway. 3 paramedics burst through the swinging kitchen doors carrying heavy medical bags and a portable defibrillator. They immediately surrounded me, pushing Megan out of the way. Their hands were quick, professional, and reassuringly firm. They began checking my pulse, strapping a blood pressure cuff to my arm, and asking rapid-fire questions about my symptoms, my medical history, and the pain in my chest. I pointed weakly toward the counter. "My pills. Please bring my pills. I need them to go to the hospital with me." One of the paramedics quickly grabbed the amber bottle, tossing it into his medical bag without a second thought. Megan watched the bottle disappear, her face pale, her hands clenching into tight, anxious fists at her sides. She had just watched the primary evidence of her attempted murder get safely packed away by a first responder. As they lifted me onto a portable stretcher, Brad appeared in the doorway, looking breathless and terrified. He reached out, attempting to place a hand on my shoulder, trying to play the role of the devastated, supportive son for the paramedics. "We will follow right behind you in the car, Dad," Brad said, his voice shaking with feigned emotion. "We will be right there." "No," I whispered, turning my face from him, looking directly at the lead paramedic. "Just take me. I do not want them in the ambulance. Please, just get me out of here." The paramedic nodded, sensing the tension, prioritizing the comfort and safety of the patient. "We need to move quickly, sir," he said to Brad, blocking his path. "You can meet us at City General Hospital." As the paramedics wheeled me out of the kitchen through the grand foyer and out into the freezing, chaotic night, I looked back one last time. Brad and Megan were standing perfectly still in the brightly lit doorway of their beautiful mansion, watching me escape their deadly trap. The ambulance doors slammed shut, enclosing me in a safe, sterile environment. As the vehicle lurched forward, speeding away from the house, I closed my eyes and let out a long, shuddering breath. I had survived the night, but the war for my life, my mind, and my legacy had only just begun. The harsh fluorescent lights of the emergency room blinded me as the paramedics rushed my stretcher through the sliding doors. The wail of the ambulance was instantly replaced by the clinical symphony of the hospital. Monitors beeped in rhythmic pulses, rubber-soled shoes squeaked against polished floors, and the sharp scent of rubbing alcohol stung my nostrils. It was a cold environment stripped of warmth, but to me it felt like an absolute sanctuary. I was finally out of their house. I was surrounded by professionals whose sole objective was keeping people alive. The paramedics transferred me to a narrow hospital bed in a private trauma bay, rattling off my vital signs to an attending physician with a digital tablet. The physical pain in my chest was slowly subsiding into a dull ache, but the frantic racing of my heart remained. I knew I had a narrow window of opportunity before Brad and Megan arrived at the hospital. They would try to hijack the narrative, painting me as a confused senior citizen who needed psychiatric help. I needed to establish firm control over my medical care immediately. As the paramedics backed away and a nurse moved in to attach sticky electrodes to my chest, I reached out and grabbed the sleeve of the attending doctor's white coat. I gripped the stiff fabric with all the physical strength my trembling hands could muster, forcing him to look directly into my eyes. He was a young man, probably no older than my son, with tired eyes and a laminated badge that read, Dr. Eris. I pulled him closer, ignoring the nurse trying to insert an intravenous line into my forearm. "I need you to listen very carefully," I said, making sure my voice was steady, authoritative, and devoid of the frailty I had exhibited back at the house. "My son and his wife are following the ambulance. When they arrive at this facility, I want them permanently barred from this room. They are not to be given any information about my condition, my treatment, or my test results. I am of sound mind, and I explicitly deny them any medical proxy or visitation rights. Put it in my permanent file right now." Dr. Aris blinked clearly, taken aback by the sudden clarity in my voice. He looked down at his chart, then back at my face, shifting into cautious alertness. "I understand, sir," he replied slowly, tapping a note into his tablet. "We respect patient privacy above all else here. They will not be allowed past the front reception desk without your express verbal permission." I released his sleeve and took a deep, shaky breath, letting my head fall back against the stiff hospital pillow. Now I continued, my gaze fixed on the sterile white ceiling tiles above me. "I need you to order a full and comprehensive toxicology screen. I want my blood drawn immediately, and I want the laboratory results expedited." The young doctor frowned slightly, his brow furrowing in genuine medical confusion. "Sir, based on your visible symptoms and the paramedics' field report, we are currently treating this as a severe cardiac event. A standard blood panel is completely routine, but a full expedited toxicology screen is highly unusual unless we specifically suspect an accidental overdose or a deliberate chemical ingestion." I turned my head to look at him, my expression hardening into solid stone. "The paramedic brought my prescription heart medication in an amber bottle," I said, gesturing toward the metal cart at the end of the bed where they had placed my belongings. "I saw someone inject an unknown and clear liquid into those exact capsules tonight. I am not having a natural heart attack. I am being actively poisoned." The nurse froze completely, the sharp intravenous needle hovering just inches above my skin. Dr. Aris went entirely rigid. The casual, hurried atmosphere of the emergency room instantly evaporated, replaced by a tense, heavy silence. A doctor is trained to look for biological causes for a patient's distress, not attempted murder orchestrated by family members. He stared at me for a long moment, searching my eyes for any sign of dementia, mental confusion, or paranoia. What he saw was the cold, unyielding certainty of a man fighting for his life. "I will order the specific test immediately," he said, his voice dropping to a serious, hushed tone. "And I will send that pill bottle straight to the laboratory for full chemical analysis." The next hour was an agonizing exercise in mental endurance. The pacing of the night slowed down to a painful, torturous crawl. The nurses drew vial after vial of my blood, securing them in plastic bags and rushing them out the door. Once the initial flurry of medical activity concluded, I was left entirely alone in the quiet, isolated trauma bay. The rhythmic beeping of my heart monitor was the only sound keeping me company. The sterile white walls felt like a pristine prison cell, cold and utterly indifferent to my profound suffering. I stared at the ticking clock on the wall, watching the red second hand sweep around the circular dial in a slow, agonizing motion. Every single minute that passed felt like a miserable eternity. I was lying in a hospital bed, staring at a blank ceiling, grappling with the darkest reality a father could face. My own flesh and blood, the boy I had raised and protected, was actively participating in my execution. The silence of the room amplified the chaotic noise running through my head. I thought about all the times I had felt dizzy over the past few months, the terrifying moments of memory loss that had convinced me my brain was physically decaying. It had all been an incredibly cruel, meticulously orchestrated illusion. I was not naturally losing my mind. My mind was being systematically destroyed by the very people who were supposed to care for me in my fragile old age. The heavy hospital door finally clicked open. Dr. Aris walked in holding a printed medical file. His face was completely devoid of color, his professional composure replaced by genuine horror. He closed the door securely, before stepping to the side of my bed. He looked directly at me, his eyes wide with deep medical concern. "You were absolutely right, Mr. Sullivan," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "We rushed the blood work, and the results are incredibly alarming." I gripped the thin hospital blanket, bracing for the ultimate confirmation of my worst fears. "What did you find?" I asked, my voice barely rising above a whisper. The doctor opened the file. "We found exceptionally high levels of ethylene glycol in your bloodstream," he explained grimly. "It is an odorless, colorless chemical compound, most commonly found in commercial antifreeze. Furthermore, it is heavily mixed with a potent liquid sedative. The combination of these two toxic substances is devastating to the nervous system. They were not trying to kill you quickly. A massive dose of antifreeze would cause rapid kidney failure and a suspicious death. But these trace amounts administered steadily over time alongside heavy sedatives are deliberately designed to mimic the exact physical symptoms of rapid-onset dementia." The words hung in the sterile air of the trauma bay, heavy and toxic. Dr. Aris closed the medical file with a soft, definitive click, his professional demeanor struggling to mask the profound disgust radiating from his expression. He assured me that he would keep the results absolutely confidential, for the time being strictly adhering to my explicit instructions, and quietly exited the room. I was alone once more. I stared at the blank white ceiling tiles, feeling the chill of the hospital sheets against my skin. Ethylene glycol, antifreeze. My own son and his wife were feeding me poison. They were deliberately destroying my cognitive functions, orchestrating a slow, agonizing descent into madness. The sheer, unfathomable cruelty of their method began to crystallize in my mind, cutting through the lingering physical pain like a razor blade. I closed my eyes and allowed my mind to drift backward, reassembling the scattered pieces of the past few months. I needed to understand the mechanics of this betrayal. I needed to pinpoint the exact moment their greed had mutated into attempted murder. The timeline assembled itself with a terrifying clarity. It started exactly 8 months ago. Brad had invited me to a lavish lunch at an exclusive downtown steakhouse. He was wearing a custom-tailored Italian suit, flashing his expensive watch, projecting the absolute pinnacle of Silicon Valley success. He pitched an expansion plan for his technology startup, speaking rapidly about cloud integration, artificial intelligence, and capturing emerging global markets. He slid a glossy portfolio across the table and boldly asked for a $6 million investment from my personal accounts. He called it a guaranteed bridge to generational wealth. But I did not build a commercial real estate empire by handing over millions of dollars based on glossy brochures and buzzwords. I demanded to see the raw, unfiltered financial data. I requested access to his general ledgers, his payroll expenses, and his actual profit margins. Brad had hesitated, his confident smile faltering for just a fraction of a second. When he finally provided the documents a week later, my experienced eyes immediately saw through the smoke and mirrors. The company was bleeding capital at an unsustainable rate. They had no tangible product, no reliable revenue stream, and massive outstanding liabilities. I told him no. I sat in his sleek, glass-walled office and delivered the harsh, unyielding truth. I told him I would not throw $6 million into a sinking ship. I advised him to downsize, cut his extravagant personal expenses, and focus on fundamental business mechanics. Brad had nodded, masking his deep resentment behind a tight, forced smile. He told me he respected my business acumen and promised to implement my advice. I believed him. That was my first catastrophic mistake. Shortly after that rejection, the strange physical symptoms began. The sudden vertigo, the terrifying memory lapses, the moments where I could not recall the name of a close friend or the details of a recent conversation. And right alongside my manufactured physical decline came Megan. My sweet, attentive daughter-in-law smoothly stepped into the role of my primary caregiver. She began dropping by my house unannounced, bringing healthy meals, organizing my pill organizers, and tidying up my paperwork. At the time, I perceived it as genuine familial love, But looking back through the lens of the toxicology report, her actions were chillingly predatory. 3 months ago, she sat me down at my kitchen table, pouring me a cup of the very tea she had likely laced with poison. She gently placed her hand over mine, her eyes swimming with manufactured sympathy. She told me how deeply concerned she and Brad were about my fading memory. She spoke about the heavy burdens of aging and the necessity of preparing for the absolute worst-case scenarios. Then she pulled a neatly printed legal document from her designer handbag. It was a comprehensive, durable power of attorney. She explained in a soft, soothing voice that signing it was merely a standard precaution. It would allow Brad to manage my complex financial affairs, pay my medical bills, and make crucial healthcare decisions if my mind continued to deteriorate. She framed it as the ultimate act of paternal love, a way to spare them the agony of going through the probate courts if I suddenly became incapacitated. I had resisted. I told her my lawyers already had contingencies in place. But she persisted quietly, bringing the document to every family gathering, subtly reminding me of my growing frailty. Lying in the hospital bed, the final piece of the puzzle snapped into place with a sickening thud. The motive was not just simple theft. It was absolute, unchecked control over my entire $12 million retirement fund. My wealth was securely locked away in various trusts and managed accounts. If I died suddenly from a massive dose of poison, it would trigger a mandatory autopsy. A suspicious death would immediately initiate a massive police investigation, and my assets would be instantly frozen by the probate court. Brad and Megan would not see a single dime until the investigation concluded, and they would likely be the prime suspects. Death was too messy. Death was too legally complicated for them. They needed me alive, but they needed me completely helpless. They needed me declared legally incompetent by a licensed medical professional. If I was diagnosed with severe rapid-onset dementia, I would be stripped of my legal autonomy. The courts would happily grant Brad the power of attorney. He would gain immediate, undisputed access to all $12 million. He could legally liquidate my assets, sell my properties, and funnel the money directly into his failing tech company to cover his massive debts. He could drain my life savings down to the very last penny while keeping me locked away in an expensive memory care facility, drooling into a cup unable to communicate the horrifying truth to anyone. The poison was designed to erase my mind while keeping my heart beating, just long enough for them to empty the bank vaults. The realization brought a fresh wave of nausea, completely unrelated to the chemical cocktail coursing through my veins. The sheer magnitude of their betrayal was staggering to comprehend. I had spent 4 decades sacrificing my time, my energy, and my peace of mind to ensure my son would never know the bitter sting of poverty. I had funded his elite education, paid for his lavish wedding, and provided the financial safety net that allowed him to play the role of a successful tech visionary. I had given him every possible advantage in life. In return, he had meticulously planned to hollow out my brain with antifreeze just to steal the final fruits of my lifelong labor. My chest tightened as I stared at the blinking green numbers on the heart monitor stationed beside my bed. The steady rhythmic beeping was a stark reminder that my heart was still beating. I was still alive. I was still breathing. And most importantly, my mind was still sharp. The fog of the sedatives was slowly lifting, replaced by a cold, burning clarity. They thought I was a vulnerable, declining old man who would simply fade quietly into the shadows of a nursing home. They thought I would surrender my $12 million legacy without a fight. They had drastically underestimated the very foundation of my character. I closed my eyes and took a long, deep breath, letting the sterile hospital air fill my lungs. The fear that had paralyzed me during the Christmas dinner was completely gone. The sadness of losing my son to unbridled greed was swiftly being replaced by a calculated, tactical resolve. I needed to gather undeniable evidence of their entire scheme. I needed to expose the financial ruin of his company and prove that the poison in my blood was placed there by his wife. I could not simply accuse them without concrete proof, because they would instantly use my previous symptoms to brand me as a paranoid, delusional senior citizen. They had set a trap designed to snare my mind, but I was going to use their own arrogance to build a cage around them. I slowly opened my eyes, staring at the closed hospital door. The time for being a loving, supportive father was permanently over. It was time to go to war. I reached for the plastic call button resting on the edge of my mattress. I pressed it firmly, waiting for the nurse to return so I could demand my discharge papers. I had a massive real estate empire to protect, and 2 predators to utterly destroy. I was fully awake now, and I was going to make sure Brad and Megan would deeply regret the day they ever decided to underestimate Rick Sullivan. I would show them exactly what happens when you try to bury a man who spent his entire life learning how to dig himself out. The heavy wooden door to my trauma bay swung open before I could press the plastic call button. Dr. Aris marched back into the room, and this time he was not holding a medical chart. He was holding his personal cell phone, his thumb hovering directly over the screen. His youthful face was set in a rigid mask of professional obligation and moral outrage. "Mr. Sullivan," he said, his voice completely devoid of its previous gentle bedside manner. "I have given you time to process the toxicology report, but I cannot in good conscience delay this any further. You have lethal levels of antifreeze and sedatives in your system. This is a clear case of attempted homicide. I am legally mandated to contact the Chicago Police Department immediately. I am calling the authorities right now." I sat forward, ignoring the sharp pull of the intravenous line taped to my forearm. I raised my hand, fixing him with a stare so intense it physically stopped him from pressing the screen. "Put the phone away, doctor," I commanded, my tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. "You are not calling the police. Not yet." He stared at me, visibly shocked by my pushback. "Sir, you are being actively poisoned by your own family members. If I let you walk out of this hospital without police intervention, I am sending you back to a crime scene. I could lose my medical license. More importantly, you could lose your life. I am calling the detectives. If you call the police right now, you will ruin any chance I have of actually putting them behind bars," I shot back, keeping my voice low so it would not carry into the bustling hallway outside. "Think about this logically. What concrete proof do you have that my daughter-in-law administered the poison tonight?" Dr. Aris frowned, his thumb slowly lowering from the screen of his phone. "We have the contaminated pill bottle. We have your blood work. We have your eyewitness testimony from the kitchen. And they have 3 months of meticulously documented medical history suggesting I am suffering from rapid-onset dementia." I explained, the bitter truth tasting like ash in my mouth. "If the police show up at that mansion tonight, Brad and Megan will simply act absolutely horrified. They will claim I must have accidentally ingested the chemicals myself in a fit of severe mental confusion. They will tell the detectives that my story about Megan holding a syringe is nothing more than a paranoid delusion caused by a failing brain. And considering the heavy sedatives currently running through my bloodstream, any competent defense attorney will have my testimony thrown out before we even reach a courtroom. They will walk away entirely free, and I will be forced into a locked psychiatric ward for my own safety." The young doctor fell completely silent. He looked at the phone in his hand, the harsh reality of the legal system slowly dawning on him. He was a brilliant physician, but he was not a strategist. He did not understand how predators like my son and his wife operated. They had planned this for months. They had laid a flawless psychological foundation to ensure that any accusation I made would sound like the wild rambling of a crazy old man. "I need exactly 48 hours, I said, my voice softening, just a fraction appealing to his humanity. "I need you to document every single detail of my blood work. Keep the tainted pill bottle locked in a secure medical safe. Treat me for the immediate cardiac distress, flush the toxins from my system, and discharge me in the morning with a clean bill of health. But you must keep the poisoning completely off the official hospital record that my son can access. If they ask, tell them it was a minor panic attack combined with a slight cardiac arrhythmia. Give me 2 days of absolute medical silence to gather the undeniable proof I need." Dr. Aris stood frozen for a long time. The ethical conflict warring inside him was clearly visible on his face. Finally, with a heavy sigh that seemed to age him 10 years, He slid his phone back into his coat pocket. 48 hours, Mr. Sullivan. I will lock the evidence away and secure your file. But if you are not back here, or if I do not hear from a police detective in exactly 2 days, I am making the call myself. That is all I ask, I replied, sinking back into the pillows. Thank you, doctor. As soon as he left the room to process my new discharge orders, I reached for my own phone. My hands were finally steady. The burning rage had settled into a cold, sharp focus. I scrolled through my encrypted contacts and found the name I needed. Victor Thorne. Victor was not just a private investigator. He was a former cybersecurity expert for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We had crossed paths 15 years ago during a massive corporate espionage case involving one of my commercial properties. He had systematically dismantled a ring of corporate thieves using nothing but a laptop and his terrifyingly brilliant mind. He was discreet, utterly ruthless when necessary, and fiercely loyal to the few people he considered friends. The line rang twice before he answered. His voice was a low, gravelly baritone that instantly commanded respect. Rick Victor said, skipping any polite pleasantries. It is 2 a.m. on Christmas. This cannot be a social call. Tell me what is burning down. I need your help, Victor, I said, keeping my voice quiet and steady. And I need it right now. I am sitting in a trauma bay at City General Hospital. My son and his wife are actively trying to murder me, and they are using a method designed to make me look insane. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. Victor did not gasp or ask me to repeat myself. He processed the information with the cold efficiency of a man who had seen the absolute darkest corners of human nature. Are you safe right now? He asked, his tone instantly shifting into operational mode. For the moment, yes, I replied. The doctors have barred them from my room. But they are sitting in the waiting area, waiting to take me back to their house. I have bought us 48 hours of medical silence before the hospital is legally required to notify the police. I need undeniable proof. I need eyes and ears inside their fortress. Do not drink any water. Do not eat any food. And do not sign a single piece of paper, Victor ordered sharply. I am 15 minutes away. I will use the staff entrance. Tell the nurses I am your legal counsel. Exactly 14 minutes later, the door to my room opened. Victor slipped inside, closing the heavy door silently behind him. He was a tall, imposing man in his late 50s, wearing a dark trench coat that seemed to absorb the harsh hospital lighting. His piercing dark eyes scanned the room, sweeping over the medical monitors before landing on my pale face. He pulled up a small plastic chair and sat close to my bed. Talk to me, Rick. Give me the entire timeline. I laid everything out for him. I told him about Brad requesting the $6 million investment for his failing startup. I told him about Megan constantly pushing the power of attorney documents. I described the terrifying dizziness, the memory gaps, and finally the horrific discovery in the kitchen with the syringe and the pill bottle. I told him about the toxicology report proving I was full of antifreeze and heavy sedatives. Victor listened without interrupting once. His face remained completely impassive, a blank wall of intense concentration. When I finished, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small encrypted tablet. They are using the dementia defense, Victor summarized accurately, his fingers moving rapidly across the tablet screen. It is a highly effective strategy. If they kill you outright, the probate courts freeze your $12 million estate for months during a homicide investigation. If they incapacitate you and gain the power of attorney, they can drain your accounts freely and legally while you rot in a nursing home. The poison is just a tool to speed up the legal process. Exactly, I said, my chest tightening again. If the police show up now, they will claim I am hallucinating. We need hard evidence. We need to catch them discussing the plan or actively tampering with my food or medication on camera. Victor stopped typing and looked at me, his dark eyes narrowing. I can get you that evidence, Rick. I have military-grade surveillance equipment in my vehicle right now. I can plant micro cameras and audio bugs inside their house that even a professional sweep would miss. I can tap into their local network and clone their digital devices. I can build an airtight case that will put them both in federal prison for decades." He paused, leaning closer, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "But there is a massive problem with this strategy. In order for me to plant those devices, and in order for us to catch them actively administering the poison on camera, you have to provide them with the opportunity." A cold chill swept through the room. I stared at him, fully understanding the terrifying implication of his words. "You are telling me I have to go back into that house," I stated, my voice completely flat. Victor nodded slowly. "Yes. You have to go back into the lion's den. You have to play the role of the dying, confused old man perfectly. You have to sit at their dining table, smile at their faces, and let them serve you the very poison that is destroying your nervous system. You will have to fake swallowing the food or use neutralizing agents to survive the ingestion. It will be the most dangerous performance of your entire life. If they suspect for one single second that you know the truth, they will not wait for the dementia to take hold. They will simply administer a massive fatal dose while you sleep and claim you suffered a catastrophic heart attack." The reality of the plan settled heavily onto my shoulders. I was a 70-year-old man who was already physically weakened by months of chemical abuse. Going back into that house meant willingly walking back into a highly active murder scene. I would be completely alone with them, behind locked doors. Every meal would be a potential death sentence. Every cup of tea would be a game of Russian roulette. The sheer danger was almost suffocating to contemplate. But as I thought about my son, about the cold, calculating greed that had driven him to try and hollow out my brain for money, the fear evaporated. I looked at Victor, my jaw clenching with absolute resolve. "Get your equipment ready, Victor. I am going back in. Let us show them exactly how to play this deadly game. I will not let my own blood bury me alive. We will gather the proof and we will end them permanently once and for all." The morning sun was a pale, freezing disk hanging over the Chicago skyline when Dr. Aris finally signed my discharge papers. He handed me a fabricated medical summary detailing a minor panic attack and an irregular heartbeat, exactly as we had carefully planned. He did not say a word as he handed me the clipboard, but the heavy, knowing look in his eyes spoke volumes. He was sending me back into the abyss. I changed back into my clothes from the night before, feeling the lingering stiffness in my aging joints. Victor had already departed, leaving me with an encrypted burner phone and a specialized supply of high-grade activated charcoal capsules tightly secured in my inner coat pocket. My instructions were absolute. I was to swallow 2 capsules secretly before every single meal to bind and completely neutralize whatever dangerous toxins Megan attempted to feed me. A young nurse wheeled me through the sliding glass doors of the busy emergency room toward the patient loading zone. Brad's sleek black luxury SUV was already idling right at the curb. As the nurse locked the brakes on my wheelchair, Brad and Megan stepped out of the vehicle, their faces instantly twisting into identical masks of exaggerated, suffocating concern. Megan rushed forward, her heels clicking rapidly on the icy pavement. She dropped to her knees beside my wheelchair, wrapping her arms around my neck in a tight embrace that smelled strongly of expensive floral perfume. I forced my body to remain completely limp, allowing my shoulders to slump and my head to tremble slightly. I needed them to believe that the unexpected hospitalization had permanently broken my spirit, that the immense fear of a failing mind had finally eroded my fierce independence and left me utterly vulnerable. "Oh, Rick," Megan cried out, her voice loud enough for the passing hospital staff to hear clearly. "We were so incredibly terrified. We stayed awake the entire night praying for your safety. You gave us such a terrible fright yesterday." I slowly raised a shaking hand, patting her back with the clumsy, uncoordinated movement of a defeated old man. "I am all right, Megan," I muttered intentionally, making my voice sound reedy and weak. I just became so confused. Everything started spinning around, and I did not know where I was. I am so deeply sorry for ruining the Christmas dinner. Brad stepped forward, placing a heavy, patronizing hand directly on my shoulder. He squeezed it just a fraction too tight. "You do not need to apologize, Dad," he said smoothly. "The doctor explained everything to us. It was a severe panic attack triggered by overwhelming cognitive stress." I nodded slowly, letting my gaze wander blankly toward the hospital entrance, playing the part of a man whose grasp on reality was slipping away. Brad gently hoisted me up from the wheelchair and helped me into the plush leather passenger seat of the massive SUV. During the long, quiet drive back to their suburban mansion, I kept my eyes completely closed, pretending to doze. In reality, my mind was racing with terrifying clarity. I listened to the soft, rhythmic hum of the vehicle's engine and the hushed, triumphant whispers exchanged between my son and his wife in the front seats. They did not say anything explicitly incriminating, but the tone of their voices told me absolutely everything I needed to know. The underlying tension from the previous night had completely evaporated. They were relaxed, confident, and utterly smug. They believed the hospital visit was a massive victory. When we finally arrived at the sprawling estate, the grand foyer felt entirely different than it had just 12 hours ago. It was no longer a beautiful symbol of my son's superficial success. It was an active battlefield, and I was stepping directly onto the front lines. Brad insisted on holding my arm securely as we walked slowly toward the main living room. He guided me to a plush, oversized recliner near the stone fireplace, treating me as if my bones were made of fragile glass. I sank heavily into the soft cushions, letting out a long, theatrical sigh of physical exhaustion. Megan immediately draped a thick cashmere blanket right over my legs, tucking the edges in with meticulous, performative care. "I will make you a hot cup of chamomile tea, Rick," she offered with a sweet, comforting smile that made my stomach churn. "It will completely soothe your nerves." I watched her walk slowly toward the kitchen, her hips swaying with a confident, victorious rhythm. She was going into the exact same room where I had caught her contaminating my medication. She felt utterly invincible. Brad sat down on the leather sofa opposite my recliner, picking up a glossy business magazine. He casually flipped through the thick pages, but his eyes kept darting over the top of the magazine to carefully observe me. He was monitoring my symptoms, waiting to see the poison take its heavy toll. I leaned my head back purposefully, letting my mouth hang open, just slightly, staring blankly at the dancing flames in the fireplace. The psychological warfare was absolutely excruciating. I had to suppress every natural instinct I possessed. I wanted to stand up, grab him by the collar of his expensive sweater, and demand to know how he could ever betray me. Instead, I forced my tired eyes to glaze over. I let a small, deliberate tremor travel down my right hand, tapping my fingers aimlessly against the leather armrest. Brad lowered his magazine, a small, barely concealed smirk playing right at the corners of his mouth. He was fully enjoying this. He was actively reveling in the sight of his powerful, authoritative father shrinking into a pathetic, helpless burden. "Do you remember exactly what happened last night, Dad?" he asked quietly, testing the dark waters of my fabricated memory loss. "You were incredibly disoriented. You were rambling about someone being in the kitchen." I blinked slowly, turning my heavy head to look at him with a perfectly crafted expression of utter bewilderment. "The kitchen," I mumbled, rubbing my forehead as if trying to massage a headache away. No, I do not remember. I just remember the room spinning uncontrollably around me. I really think my mind is playing cruel tricks on me, Brad. I am so terribly tired." The smirk on Brad's face solidified into a broad, satisfied smile. He nodded very sympathetically. "It is okay, Dad. The doctors warned us that confusion and false memories are quite common at this stage. You do not need to worry about managing anything anymore. Megan and I are going to take complete care of you. We are going to handle all the heavy lifting from now on." The sheer audacity of his lie was staggering, but I swallowed my pride and nodded gratefully. 10 minutes later, Megan returned from the kitchen carrying a heavy silver serving tray. She set it down on the low coffee table between us. On the tray rested a steaming porcelain cup of tea and a small ceramic bowl filled with warm, creamy, delicious-looking oatmeal. "You really need to eat something light, Rick," she said, handing me the warm porcelain cup. "The hospital food is never quite enough, and your body needs the physical energy to heal." I stared at the pale, steaming liquid inside the cup. The floral scent of chamomile rose into the air, masking whatever clear, toxic chemical she had undoubtedly slipped into the brew. The true test of my physical endurance had finally arrived. I could not simply refuse to eat. If I suddenly stopped consuming the food she prepared, they would immediately realize I knew all about the poison. I had to consume the meals to maintain the illusion of compliance, and I had to do it while looking them directly in the eyes. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but I kept my external movements painfully slow and deliberate. I reached out with a heavily trembling hand. I intentionally allowed my fingers to shake violently as I grasped the delicate handle of the teacup. Before Megan had originally entered the room while Brad was completely distracted by his phone, I had already managed to slip 2 activated charcoal capsules from my inner coat pocket into the palm of my left hand. As I brought the teacup toward my lips, I feigned a sudden, severe coughing fit. I turned my head away, bringing my left hand up to quickly cover my mouth. In that split second of chaotic movement, I tossed the charcoal capsules to the very back of my throat. I quickly brought the teacup to my lips and took a large, scalding gulp of the chamomile tea, using the poisoned liquid to wash down the neutralizing agents. I had crossed the threshold. I was actively consuming their poison to secure their ultimate permanent downfall today. The agonizing routine continued for 3 brutal days. Every meal was a high-stakes performance. I sat at that polished dining table, my hands trembling intentionally, forcing myself to swallow the food Megan prepared with her falsely sweet smile. The charcoal capsules kept me alive, but the physical toll of battling the toxins left my stomach churning. I spent my days staring blankly out the windows, playing the part of a hollow shell, while my mind tracked their every movement. That opportunity arrived on a Thursday evening. Brad had been obsessing over an exclusive tech gala in downtown Chicago. It was a massive networking event where he needed to maintain the illusion of a thriving startup executive. Megan spent hours in her bathroom, preparing to play the role of the successful wife. As the sun dipped below the frozen horizon, they stood in the grand foyer, dressed in expensive formal wear. Megan draped a heavy blanket over my shoulders where I sat. "We will be back late, Rick," she cooed, checking her diamond earrings. "You just rest here." Brad adjusted his silk tie. "Do not try to walk up the stairs by yourself, Dad. Just sleep in the recliner tonight. We do not want you taking a fall." I nodded slowly, letting a vacant, confused expression settle on my face. "Have a wonderful time," I mumbled. The heavy oak front door clicked shut. I listened to the hum of their luxury vehicle starting in the driveway and the crunch of tires backing out onto the street. I waited exactly 5 minutes, counting every agonizing second. When I was absolutely certain they were gone, I threw the blanket off my legs. I stood up, shedding the frail old man persona like a discarded coat. I pulled the encrypted burner phone from its hiding place inside the couch cushion and sent a single text message to Victor. "The house is empty." 10 minutes later, the back patio door swung open without a sound. Victor Thorne stepped into the kitchen, dressed entirely in black, carrying a slim briefcase. He did not waste time with greetings. He moved with the silent efficiency of a predator, entering a new hunting ground. We had an incredibly tight window, and he knew exactly what needed to be done. "I need the primary preparation area," Victor whispered, unpacking tiny, intricate tools onto the kitchen counter. "Where does she handle your food and medication?" I pointed to the far end of the marble island. "Right there. She uses the space next to the espresso machine to open the capsules." Victor nodded, pulling a micro camera from a protective foam case. It was no larger than a grain of rice. He pulled over a small step stool and examined the ornate light fixture hanging directly above the island. With steady surgical precision, he dismantled a small section of the fixture housing, embedding the lens so it pointed directly down at the marble surface. He wired the tiny device into the existing electrical current. In less than 8 minutes, he had secured a flawless, unobstructed view of the exact spot where Megan committed her daily crimes. Next, the audio, Victor said, packing his tools and moving swiftly toward the hallway. I need ears in the spaces where they speak freely. Where is his home office? Down the hall, second door on the left, I directed, following closely behind him. Victor entered Brad's expansive study. The room smelled of expensive leather and arrogant ambition. Victor bypassed the desk entirely and focused on the ceiling. He unscrewed the plastic cover of the smoke detector. From his briefcase, he produced a highly sensitive audio bug capable of picking up whispers from across a large room. He spliced it into the detector's wiring harness, hiding the microphone perfectly behind the slotted plastic vents. He repeated this exact process in the main living room and the master bedroom hallway, turning the house into a comprehensive surveillance net. I stood watch by the front windows, the adrenaline masking my physical exhaustion. Watching Victor work was a masterclass in covert operations. He left zero physical traces, no scratched paint, no displaced furniture. He was standing on the step stool in the foyer, finishing the installation of the final audio receiver inside the central alarm panel when my burner phone vibrated sharply in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was an alert from a motion sensor Victor had placed at the end of the driveway. Victor. I hissed, my heart leaping into my throat. The perimeter sensor just tripped. They are back. Victor froze, his hands still deep inside the alarm panel wiring. He glanced at his specialized wristwatch. It has only been 45 minutes. The gala was supposed to last until midnight. Something must have happened, I said, panic tightening my chest as I saw the sweep of headlights cutting across the front lawn. They are pulling into the driveway now. You have less than 30 seconds. Victor did not panic. His movements merely accelerated into a blur of calculated efficiency. He snapped the plastic cover back onto the alarm panel, wiped the surface with a microfiber cloth, and grabbed his briefcase. Get back in the chair, he ordered quietly, sprinting toward the rear of the house. Act like you are asleep. I scrambled across the living room, throwing myself into the plush leather recliner. I grabbed the heavy cashmere blanket and yanked it up to my chin. I slouched my shoulders, let my head fall to the side, and closed my eyes, forcing my breathing into a slow, rhythmic pattern. I heard the heavy deadbolt on the front door click. The door swung open, bringing a rush of freezing winter air into the foyer. I cannot believe you caused a scene like that. Megan's voice echoed sharply through the hallway, her tone dripping with furious indignation. You humiliated us in front of the primary investors. I did not cause a scene, Brad shot back, his voice tight with suppressed rage. I received an urgent alert. The offshore accounts are being flagged. I had to leave to make a secure call. Their footsteps moved heavily across the hardwood floor. I kept my eyes shut, my muscles completely relaxed, playing the role of the oblivious, medicated burden. I prayed silently that Victor had made it out the back door in time. Brad walked into the living room, his expensive shoes pausing just a few feet away from my chair. I felt his presence looming over me. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. He stood there for several agonizing seconds, simply watching me breathe. He is out cold, Brad muttered, turning away from me. Let us go to the office. We need to figure out how to bypass this banking freeze before the end of the week. As they walked down the hall and closed the heavy door to the study, I opened my eyes in the dark. The house was quiet again, but everything had fundamentally changed. My burner phone buzzed once against my leg. It was a single text message from Victor. The surveillance network is live. I smiled. I remained perfectly still in the plush leather recliner for what felt like hours. The grand house settled into a deep, oppressive silence, punctuated only by the occasional groan of the heating system settling against the bitter Chicago cold. My body ached from the physical toll of the day, but my mind was wired, thrumming with a sharp, dangerous energy. Once I was absolutely certain that Brad and Megan were completely absorbed in whatever crisis had driven them home early, I slowly reached into my pocket. My fingers brushed the cold, metallic edge of the small receiver Victor had left behind. It was a sleek black device no larger than a car key equipped with a tiny earpiece. I carefully extracted the earpiece and pressed it firmly into my right ear, letting my silver hair fall naturally to conceal it. I tapped the small power button on the side of the receiver. A soft, reassuring burst of static hummed to life in my ear, instantly followed by the crystal-clear sound of footsteps echoing on hardwood. Victor had not exaggerated. The audio quality was terrifyingly pristine. I adjusted the frequency dial, scrolling past the ambient noise of the empty kitchen and the quiet hum of the master bedroom until the channel locked onto the smoke detector, hidden directly above Brad's mahogany desk. The oak door of the study was closed, blocking the sound from reaching the hallway, but through the earpiece I was sitting inside the room with them. I could hear the sharp clinking of a glass decanter against a crystal tumbler. Brad was pouring a drink. Not a celebratory drink, but a frantic, desperate pour. The liquid splashed heavily. "I need you to calm down, Brad," Megan said. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the silence of the study like a serrated blade. "Pacing holes into the expensive rug is not going to unfreeze the offshore accounts. You need to focus." I heard the heavy thud of a crystal tumbler hitting the wooden desk. "Calm down!" Brad snapped, his voice trembling with a frantic, unhinged pitch I had never heard from him before. "Are you completely out of your mind?" "Megan, we do not have the luxury of remaining calm. Do you understand who just froze those accounts? It was not the federal government. It was them. They are sending us a message. They are cutting off our access to the operational funds, so we cannot make any sudden moves." Megan let out a long, frustrated sigh. The leather upholstery of a chair creaked as she sat down. "Then we call them. We explain that the transfer is simply delayed because the old man ended up in the hospital last night. We tell them the timeline has shifted by a few days." Brad let out a bitter, hollow laugh. "A timeline shift. You think these people care about medical emergencies? You think they care that my father had a panic attack? They only care about the money." I sat in the dark living room, clutching the receiver in my sweaty palm. I strained to hear every single syllable. The tech gala had not ended early because of a simple banking error. Brad had received a threat. A very real, very present threat that had sent him sprinting out of a room full of potential investors. I heard the sharp, repetitive clicking of a pen. Brad was pacing again, his heavy dress shoes moving relentlessly across the floor. "I am calling him," Brad finally muttered. "I have to call him and buy us more time. I cannot let them think we are trying to run." "Are you absolutely sure that is a smart idea?" Megan asked, a rare note of genuine fear bleeding into her usually confident voice. "If you show them how desperate you are, they might just decide to cut their losses and make an example out of you." "They are not going to make an example out of me if they know the massive payout is just days away," Brad replied. The sound of a cell phone dialing filled my earpiece. The line rang 3 times. A heavy, distorted voice answered on the other end. It was not a professional greeting. It was a low, menacing growl. Brad swallowed audibly. The microphone picked up the dry, nervous click in his throat. "It is Brad," he said, his voice dropping an octave, trying to sound authoritative but failing miserably. "I need to speak with Silas. Tell him it is regarding the $4 million principal on the tech venture." The man on the other line muttered something unintelligible before the call was transferred. A few seconds later, a smooth, dangerously calm voice came through the speaker. "Brad." "My friend Silas," said, his tone dripping with a terrifying, calculated warmth. "I was wondering when you might reach out. I trust you received the small administrative hold we placed on your Caribbean accounts tonight. We felt it was necessary to ensure we retained your full, undivided attention." "I am listening." Brad stammered, completely abandoning his tough exterior. "Silas, listen to me. I know the principal payment is due. I have the funds. The entire $4 million plus the negotiated interest penalty. I just need a minor extension. The process was delayed due to a sudden family medical emergency. My father was hospitalized last night. We had a slight setback. A setback, Silas repeated softly, the word rolling off his tongue like a physical threat. Brad, we entered into a very specific financial arrangement 8 months ago. You came to us desperate. Your revolutionary startup had been completely bankrupt for months. You had burned through your initial capital, you had defrauded your primary investors, and you were days away from facing federal indictment for corporate embezzlement. We provided you with $4 million to artificially inflate your ledgers to keep your illusion alive and to keep the federal regulators off your back. We did not ask questions. We simply demanded our agreed-upon return. My heart stopped beating. The darkness of the living room seemed to press in on me from all sides. 8 months. Brad's highly publicized tech startup had been a rotting corpse for 8 months. He was not a successful CEO. He was a colossal fraud who had borrowed millions of dollars from a ruthless Chicago loan shark syndicate just to maintain his wealthy facade. He had taken illegal violent money to hide his failure. I have the money, Brad pleaded, his voice rising in sheer panic. I swear to you, Silas, I am inheriting my father's entire estate. $12 million. The transition is already in motion. We are finalizing the power of attorney this week. Once he is declared legally incompetent, I have full unrestricted access to the trusts. I will wire the entire debt straight into your accounts. Silas let out a slow, chilling breath. I do not care about your father, Brad. I do not care about his health, and I certainly do not care about your inheritance timelines. The syndicate does not grant extensions. We are not a charitable institution. We are a business. You have exactly 14 days, Silas continued, his voice hardening into absolute steel. 2 weeks from tonight. If the $4 million is not completely cleared in our designated accounts by midnight on that exact date, we will not freeze your offshore assets. We will come directly to that beautiful $5 million home in the suburbs. We will sit down with you and we will collect our debt using alternative highly physical methods. And Brad, we will not stop with you. We will collect from your lovely wife as well. Do we have a crystal clear understanding? Yes. Brad choked out, terror completely paralyzing his vocal cords. Yes. 14 days. You will have it. The line went dead. I heard the phone drop onto the wooden desk. Brad let out a ragged, terrifying sob. He collapsed into his leather chair, the sound of his heavy breathing filling my earpiece. Megan rushed to his side. 2 weeks, she whispered, her voice shaking. Brad, we cannot wait for the natural progression of the toxins. If the old man does not sign that document before the deadline, they will kill us. They will actually kill us. We have to accelerate the process. We have to increase the dosage starting tomorrow morning. He needs to be completely incapacitated by Monday so we can force his signature. The horrifying truth settled over me like a heavy, suffocating shroud. The loan sharks were not just threatening my son. They had inadvertently placed a ticking clock on my own life. Brad and Megan were entirely out of time. They were desperate, cornered animals. They were going to amplify the poison immediately. They needed my mind completely destroyed in a matter of a few short days. I sat frozen in the darkness, the earpiece humming silently, knowing my execution had just been definitively scheduled. The silence that followed Brad's frantic phone call was heavy and suffocating. Through the tiny receiver pressed firmly against my ear, I could hear the erratic, shallow gasps of my son struggling to breathe. The clinking of glass chimed again, as Brad poured another massive measure of liquor, completely abandoning any pretense of control. He was pacing the length of the mahogany study like a trapped animal. His heavy footsteps pounded against the expensive Persian rug, each thud a desperate testament to his spiraling panic. I remained motionless in the dark living room. The cashmere blanket pulled tight across my chest, absorbing every single sound of their unraveling reality. Brad let out a sudden, violent yell. The terrifying sound was immediately followed by the loud crash of breaking crystal. He had hurled his glass directly at the stone fireplace, The shattered pieces rained down onto the hardwood floor like sharp, jagged rain. "Are you completely insane?" Megan hissed, her voice dropping to a harsh, venomous whisper. "Keep your voice down. The old man is sleeping just down the hallway. If you wake him up and he wanders back here, everything is ruined." "I do not care if he wakes up," Brad shouted back, though he made a strained effort to lower his volume. "Do you not understand what is happening, Megan? We are out of time. Silas is not making empty threats. If we do not have $4 million wired into their offshore accounts in exactly 14 days, they are going to come to this house. They are going to break through the front door, and they are going to kill us. They are going to tear our lives apart piece by piece until they get their money." "You are acting like a pathetic coward," Megan spat back, her tone dripping with sudden, unmasked disgust. "Stop throwing tantrums and focus. We have a plan. We have been executing this plan perfectly for months. We just need to stay the course." "We cannot stay the course," Brad pleaded, his voice cracking with sheer desperation. "We cannot wait for the slow cognitive decline anymore. You have to increase the dosage. You have to double it, triple it, whatever it takes. I need him completely out of his mind by tomorrow. I need him sitting at this desk signing that power of attorney document by Friday. We can pay the syndicate by Wednesday and finally breathe again." Megan let out a sharp, condescending laugh. "Are you actually stupid, Brad? Do you have any idea how the human body processes ethylene glycol and heavy sedatives? If I triple the dosage in his tea tomorrow morning, he will not just become confused. He will go into acute renal failure, slip into a coma, and die right there on the living room floor. The medical examiner will run a routine autopsy, find a lethal massive quantity of industrial antifreeze in his liver, and immediately call the homicide detectives. We will not get $12 million. We will get life in federal prison." "I do not care about the medical science," Brad sobbed. "I care about the men with guns who are going to show up at our doorstep in 2 weeks. If we go to prison, at least we are alive. If Silas comes here, we are dead. Just give him the fatal dose. Give it to him tonight. We can fake a suicide. You are smart, Megan. We can make it look convincing. We just need the money now." I sat frozen in the recliner, my blood turning to absolute ice. My own son was actively begging his wife to murder me in my sleep. He was no longer waiting for the slow decay of my mind. The pressure from the loan sharks had stripped away his final shred of humanity. He wanted me dead tonight to save his own miserable life. When she finally spoke again, the frantic defensive edge had completely vanished from her voice. In its place was a terrifyingly calm, deadpan tone that sent a violent shiver down my spine. It was the voice of a true psychopath, a predator who was entirely in control of her emotions and completely devoid of a conscience. "Listen to me very carefully," Megan said softly. "You are not going to forge a suicide note. You are not going to change the plan. And you are certainly not going to dictate how I administer my dosage. You brought this massive, catastrophic debt into our marriage. I am the one who figured out how to save us. I am the one who formulated the chemical solution. I am the one who has been smiling at that arrogant old man every single day, feeding him his destruction, drop by drop, while you cowered in your office." Her voice grew even quieter, carrying a lethal, hypnotic authority. "You are weak, Brad. You have always been weak, but I am not. I know the precise threshold between a slow cognitive collapse and a sudden suspicious death. We are going to stick to my schedule. I will increase the sedative slightly to make him more compliant, and we will get the signature on Friday. If you panic and ruin my meticulously crafted timeline, I promise you, Silas and his syndicate will be the absolute least of your worries. I will pack my bags, I will drain the remaining accounts, and I will leave you here to face them entirely alone. And before I go, I will anonymously send the tainted pill bottle straight to the police department with your fingerprints all over it." Brad gasped, a pathetic whimpering sound of total defeat. "You would not do that. We are in this together. We are married. We are surviving." Megan corrected him, her tone completely devoid of affection. "Do not ever confuse my willingness to kill your father with a profound devotion to you. I am doing this for the $12 million. I am doing this so I never have to worry about money for the rest of my natural life. If you stand in the way of my payout, because you lack the stomach for a little pressure, I will cut you loose without a second thought. Now sit down, shut your mouth, and let me handle the old man. The study fell into a dead, horrifying silence. I could hear Brad weeping softly, completely broken by his wife. He had invited a monster into our family, thinking he was the one in control. But Megan was the true architect of this nightmare. She was cold, she was brilliant, and she was utterly ruthless. I reached up with a trembling hand and turned off the receiver. I had heard enough. The stakes were no longer just about my financial legacy or my declining health. It was a race against time. I was locked in a house with a woman who had just outlined her expertise in murder. I closed my eyes, letting the darkness of the living room wash over me, knowing that tomorrow morning, the true battle for my life would begin. I had just pressed the small power button on the receiver, ready to plunge the living room back into absolute silence, when a violent, muffled thud echoed down the hallway. It was loud enough to vibrate through the heavy oak doors and travel across the hardwood floors. My thumb froze against the smooth plastic of the device. Instinct overrode my exhaustion. I pressed the button again. The soft burst of static returned to my right ear, instantly reconnecting me to the hidden microphone inside the study smoke detector. Brad was weeping openly now, gasping for air in ragged, pathetic heaves. "I cannot do this anymore," he choked out, his voice utterly broken. "I cannot live like this. We are going to get caught. Silas is going to kill us, or the federal agents are going to lock us away forever. I should just go to the police. I should just confess everything and beg the prosecutors for witness protection." A sharp, stinging slap echoed through the earpiece. Megan had struck him across the face, silencing his sobbing instantly. "You spineless coward," she hissed, her voice dropping into a terrifyingly calm, venomous register. "You are not going to any police station. You are going to pull yourself together and finish exactly what we started. Look at me. Look right at me, Brad." A brief, heavy silence filled the room. "We have been through this exact scenario before," Megan said, her tone taking on a rhythmic, almost hypnotic cadence. "Do you remember? We were drowning in your initial startup debt. You had completely drained the investor capital and you were terrified. You were crying on the bathroom floor, begging for a way out. And what did we do? We executed a perfect, flawless plan." Brad let out a pathetic whimper. "That was different. That was your father." The words struck me with the physical force of a sledgehammer. My blood ran completely cold. I gripped the armrests of the leather recliner, my knuckles turning white in the darkness. Her father, Dr. William Stanton, a highly respected and wealthy dentist, had passed away just 14 months ago. The official cause of death was listed as heart failure following a rapid, tragic battle with severe dementia. I had attended the funeral. I had stood next to Brad and hugged Megan as she wept over his mahogany casket. I had even paid for the expensive floral arrangements, feeling genuine pity for a young woman losing her beloved parent to a cruel disease. "It was not different at all," Megan continued, her tone chillingly practical, as if she were discussing a mundane grocery list rather than patricide. It was the exact same chemical formulation, the exact same slow, undetectable cognitive decline. "My father trusted me completely, just like your father trusts you. He drank the tea I made him. He swallowed the capsules I prepared. And when his mind was perfectly clouded, when he could no longer remember his own birthday, he signed over the entire $3 million estate without a single question. And you blew through every single penny of my father's money in less than 6 months." Megan spat, the raw anger returning to her voice. "You poured all $3 million of my inheritance into your pathetic, sinking company to cover up your initial embezzlement. You wasted a perfectly executed murder on a failed business model. That is exactly why we had to go to Silas and the syndicate. That is why we are in this current mess, because of your gross incompetence. I stopped breathing. The darkness of the living room began to spin around me. The air in my lungs turned into jagged shards of glass. My son was not just a desperate, failing businessman who had made a terrible financial mistake. He was not just a coward pushed into a dark corner by ruthless loan sharks. He was a complicit, active participant in a calculated, cold-blooded murder. He had stood by and watched his wife slowly poison her own father to death, and he had eagerly taken the stolen blood money to fund his superficial, fraudulent lifestyle. They were a pair of serial killers moving methodically from one elderly family member to the next, harvesting our lives to finance their unending greed. I did not want to hurt William. Brad whispered, his voice cracking with a sickening mixture of guilt and supreme self-pity. But we desperately needed the capital. I genuinely thought the company would turn around. I thought the new software launch would cover the financial gap. I never meant to lose your father's money. I do not care about the lost money anymore, Megan replied coldly. I care about our immediate survival. We perfected the dosage with my father. We know exactly how long the human liver takes to process the antifreeze without leaving a massive, suspicious trace for the medical examiner. We know how to mimic the neurological decay. Your father is a much larger target, but the biological mechanics are absolutely identical. $12 million is more than enough to pay off Silas' move to a country without an extradition treaty and live like kings for the rest of our lives. But my father's body is physically stronger. Brad argued weakly, desperately grasping for excuses. He fought off the cardiac episode tonight. The doctors at the hospital might have noticed something unusual. What if they ran a specialized blood panel? If they had found something, the police would have escorted us out of the waiting room in handcuffs hours ago. Megan dismissed his concern with supreme, chilling arrogance. They discharged him with a simple diagnosis of a panic attack. The medical community is incredibly predictable. When they see a 70-year-old man with a documented history of recent memory lapses clutching his chest, they see an aging heart failing under natural stress. They do not look for industrial toxins. They do not look for murder. We are completely safe. But we absolutely cannot afford to wait any longer. She paused, and the rustling of heavy fabric indicated she was stepping much closer to him. Tomorrow morning, I am doubling the sedative and tripling the ethylene glycol. By tomorrow night, his brain will be entirely submerged in a thick chemical fog. He will not be able to form a coherent sentence. On Friday morning, you will place the power of attorney document directly in front of him, put a pen in his trembling hand, and guide his signature. Once the ink is dry and the notary stamps the official seal, I will administer the final fatal dose. It will look like a tragic, massive stroke brought on by severe dementia. We will weep at his funeral, we will pay Silas on Monday, and we will finally be free. Okay, Brad whispered, surrendering to the darkness. Okay. Do it. Just get it over with. I cannot stand looking at him anymore. The tiny receiver hummed with absolute suffocating silence against my ear. I sat perfectly still in the dark living room, the horrifying, undeniable truth settling over my shattered soul. My son was a ruthless monster, and I was indeed his next scheduled victim. The pale rays of cold winter sunlight pierced through the heavy curtains, casting sharp, dark shadows across the hardwood floor. I remained perfectly still in the leather recliner, the tiny receiver tucked into my pocket. My mind was a battlefield of grief and resolve. I was fighting to survive a pair of seasoned killers. The revelation of Megan's father weighed heavily on me. They had murdered him with terrifying efficiency, and they were orchestrating my exact same fate. I was going to turn their trap into a steel cage. Before I heard footsteps moving upstairs, I pulled the activated charcoal from my pocket and swallowed 3 thick capsules dry. I needed maximum neutralizing power. I deliberately unbuttoned my collar, ruffled my silver hair, and let my facial muscles slacken. I assumed the posture of a man completely broken by the night. At 7 o'clock, the kitchen door swung open. Megan walked in dressed in a soft cashmere sweater. She carried a silver tray, holding a steaming mug of herbal tea and fresh oatmeal. As she approached, her eyes narrowed slightly, calculating the effects of her chemical warfare. "Good morning, Rick," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "You look like you had a rough night. I brought you something warm to settle your stomach." I looked up, forcing my eyes to dart nervously around the room. My hands shook violently as I reached for the cup. "Where is my son?" I whispered, my voice incredibly frail and laced with genuine-sounding panic. "I need to speak to him right now. My head feels like it is full of thick gray smoke. I cannot remember anything." A flash of triumphant satisfaction crossed her perfectly made-up face. "Brad is finishing getting dressed, Rick. Drink your hot tea. It will help clear the fog. I will go fetch him for you." As soon as she turned her back, I acted with brutal speed. I grabbed the porcelain mug. The liquid inside smelled faintly metallic. She had heavily laced it just as she promised Brad. I quickly poured the vast majority of the toxic tea into a potted fern next to the recliner, leaving only a tiny sip at the bottom. I set the cup back on the tray, slumping forward in the chair. Footsteps hurried down the wooden stairs. Brad appeared in the living room, rushing to my side. He was wearing crisp slacks and a pressed dress shirt. "Dad," Brad said, kneeling next to my chair. "Megan said you were asking for me. Are you feeling all right?" I reached out with trembling fingers and grabbed the fabric of his expensive shirt. I let out a dry sob, channeling every ounce of betrayal and grief I felt into my performance. "I cannot do this anymore, Brad." I choked out, tears pooling in my eyes. "I am losing my mind. The shadows are creeping in. I forgot how to tie my shoes this morning. I forgot your mother's maiden name. I am absolutely terrified." Brad placed his hands over mine, rubbing my knuckles soothingly. "It is going to be okay, Dad. We are right here with you. We are not going to leave you alone." I shook my head frantically. "No, you do not understand. My finances, the properties, the trusts. I cannot manage them. If I make a terrible mistake, everything I built for you will be destroyed." I paused, drawing a shaky breath, delivering the exact words they were desperately waiting to hear. "I need you to take control, Brad. I am finally ready to sign the power of attorney. I surrender." The air completely stopped moving. Brad stared at me, his eyes widening in a mixture of disbelief and surging ecstasy. Megan's fingers tightened visibly on his shoulders. They had won. They truly believed they had broken my mind and secured the $12 million prize. "But we have to do it properly," I continued. "We cannot just sign a printed internet form. The bank will flag it immediately. We have to go to Jonathan Mitchell. He is my primary trust attorney. His office is downtown. If Jonathan oversees the transfer and notarizes the documents personally, no one can ever challenge your absolute legal authority. Call him right now. Tell him it is an absolute emergency. Tell him I am transferring full control today." Brad swallowed hard. He exchanged a rapid, significant glance with Megan. The loan sharks had given him 2 weeks. By securing the signature today, legally binding, and notarized by a respected attorney, he was guaranteeing his survival and his ultimate wealth. "Okay, Dad," Brad said, his voice thick with poorly concealed triumph. "If that is what you truly want, we will do it exactly your way. I will call Jonathan's office right now and tell him we are coming in." He stood up quickly, pulling his phone from his pocket, his fingers dancing across the screen. Megan leaned down, smoothing my chaotic hair with a touch that made my skin crawl. "You are making the best decision for your future, Rick," she whispered softly. "You can finally rest now. We will take care of absolutely everything." I closed my eyes, offering a weak, trembling nod. I knew exactly what kind of rest she was planning for me. Once that document was officially signed, I would be entirely useless to them. I would be given the final lethal dose of antifreeze before the sun set. Within 10 minutes, Brad returned from the hallway, vibrating with nervous energy. "Jonathan is clearing his entire morning schedule for us. We need to leave within the hour. Megan, go get dressed. Dad, let me help you put on a clean suit." We want you looking dignified for the attorney. Brad helped me dress, treating me with the gentle reverence reserved for a dying king, handing over his crown. He buttoned my shirt, tied my shoes, and draped my heavy wool winter coat over my stooped shoulders. He hummed a quiet, cheerful tune under his breath. He was celebrating his victory. He was visualizing the $4 million transferring to the syndicate and the remaining $8 million funding his fraudulent lifestyle. Megan emerged from the master bedroom, wearing a sharp-tailored black dress, pearl earrings, and an immaculate layer of makeup. She carried a sleek designer handbag, walking with a confident, victorious stride. They were dressing up for a massive financial conquest. They were putting on their finest clothes to celebrate the culmination of a successful murder plot. We walked out the heavy oak front door together, the freezing winter wind biting at our faces. Brad guided me carefully down the icy stone steps, holding my elbow tightly. Megan walked ahead, unlocking the doors of the black luxury SUV. They helped me into the plush leather back seat, buckling my seatbelt with mocking care. As Brad started the engine, I looked at the back of his head. I looked at the beautiful, deadly woman sitting beside him. They were completely ecstatic. They believed they had outsmarted everyone. They had absolutely no idea that I had spent the entire night listening to their darkest secrets, or that my attorney, Jonathan Mitchell, was not preparing a standard power of attorney document. He was preparing a mountain of forensic evidence, a team of federal agents, and an ironclad criminal indictment. The heavy SUV pulled out of the snowy driveway, its tires crunching aggressively against the ice. We merged onto the main road, heading smoothly toward the towering skyline of downtown Chicago. I leaned my head against the cold glass window, maintaining my vacant, confused expression. The trap was perfectly set. The predators were happily driving the vehicle, and I was leading them straight to the slaughterhouse. The drive into downtown Chicago was a masterclass in silent tension. I watched the towering skyscrapers rise against the bleak winter sky. Brad pulled into the underground parking garage. He leapt out, rushing to open my door with fake devotion. Megan followed behind, clutching her handbag, scanning the garage with impatient greed. They walked me to the elevator, standing beside me like prison guards escorting a condemned man to the gallows. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor was silent. Brad vibrated with anticipation, believing he was minutes away from securing his false empire. The brass doors slid open, revealing the opulent reception area of Jonathan Mitchell's law firm. Rich mahogany paneling and floor-to-ceiling windows projected an aura of absolute power. A receptionist greeted us, her expression neutral. She gestured toward the double doors of the primary boardroom at the end of the corridor. "Mr. Mitchell is expecting you," she stated softly. Brad placed his hand on the small of my back, guiding me forward with a gentle, patronizing push. "Just take it slow, Dad," he whispered. "We are almost done. We are going to get everything sorted out today." I shuffled my feet, maintaining my stooped posture, letting a vacant look glaze over my eyes. "I am just so incredibly tired, Brad," I mumbled. "I want to go home and sleep." Soon Rick Megan chimed in, pushing open the heavy boardroom doors. Very soon. The boardroom was vast and intimidating. A polished mahogany table dominated the center, surrounded by high-backed leather chairs. At the far end sat Jonathan. He was a formidable man in his late 60s with sharp, calculating eyes and a reputation for utter ruthlessness. We had been friends and legal allies for 3 decades. He knew every intricate detail of my $12 million estate. Jonathan stood up as we entered, buttoning his suit jacket. He did not smile. His face was a mask of professional detachment. "Have a seat, Rick," Jonathan said, gesturing to the chair to his right. Brad and Megan took the plush seats opposite us. They leaned forward immediately, their eyes fixed hungrily on the thick leather folder resting beneath Jonathan's folded hands. "Thank you for fitting us in on such short notice, Jonathan." Brad began, his voice dripping with artificial charm. "Dad has been struggling significantly over the past few weeks. His cognitive decline has accelerated faster than anticipated. We all agreed it was absolutely necessary to finalize the power of attorney today to ensure his assets are properly protected. Jonathan did not acknowledge Brad's greeting. He kept his steely gaze locked entirely on me. "Rick," he asked, his tone deliberately formal, "are you fully aware of exactly why you are sitting in this room today?" I let my jaw go slack, staring blankly at the table. "Brad wants me to sign the papers," I whispered, letting my hands tremble violently. "He says I cannot remember things anymore. I just want the terrible confusion to finally stop." Brad nodded eagerly, reaching across the table. "Exactly, Dad. I am going to take care of all the heavy lifting. Jonathan, if we could just proceed directly to the signature, I know Dad desperately wants to rest." Jonathan slowly reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a silver fountain pen. He placed it deliberately on the exact center of the table. Brad's eyes tracked the pen like a starving animal. He leaned forward, his breathing shallow, his fingers twitching with the overwhelming desire to force it into my trembling hand. "We will proceed," Jonathan stated, his voice dropping colder than the freezing winter air outside. "But first, Brad, we need to review the documentation to ensure you fully comprehend the immense legal responsibilities you are assuming." Jonathan slid the thick leather folder slowly across the mahogany table. It stopped precisely in front of my son. Brad let out a triumphant breath. He reached out his manicured fingers, eagerly flipping open the heavy leather cover. He was expecting to see a standard legally binding power of attorney form, complete with highlighted signature lines. Instead, he found a neatly organized stack of wildly different documents. I watched his face meticulously. I watched the smug, arrogant smile completely evaporate, replaced by a mask of profound, paralyzing confusion. The very first document in the stack was a highly detailed certified toxicology report from City General Hospital, clearly highlighting lethal levels of ethylene glycol and heavy sedatives floating in my bloodstream. Brad blinked rapidly, struggling to process the medical terminology. He quickly flipped to the second page. It was a comprehensive financial dossier detailing the absolute bankruptcy of his technology startup, including the desperate illegal $4 million loan he had secured from the Chicago syndicate. His hands began to shake uncontrollably. The crisp paper rattled loudly in the quiet room. He frantically flipped to the third document. It was a federal asset freeze warrant stamped with the official red seal of the United States Department of Justice, immediately halting all outgoing transfers from his personal and business accounts. "What is this?" Brad choked out, his voice cracking violently. "Jonathan, what kind of sick joke are you playing? Where is the power of attorney document?" Megan leaned over, her eyes scanning the terrifying documents resting in Brad's trembling hands. The color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking like a ghost. She gasped a sharp, ragged sound of pure terror as she recognized the exact chemical name of the antifreeze she had been actively pumping into my body. Jonathan leaned back in his tall leather chair, steepling his fingers perfectly. "There is no power of attorney, Brad," Jonathan declared, his powerful voice echoing like a judge delivering a fatal sentence. "You are not taking control of your father's estate. You are taking control of a federal criminal indictment." Before Brad could even open his mouth to formulate a frantic lie, the heavy oak doors at the back of the boardroom swung open with a resounding, violent crash. The steel trap had officially snapped shut. Victor Thorne marched confidently into the room, his dark eyes fixed on my son with the ruthless intensity of a hunting predator. He was not alone. Flanking him were two broad-shouldered federal agents wearing dark tactical jackets bearing the bold yellow letters of the FBI. Right behind them walked a seasoned, grim-faced homicide detective from the Chicago Police Department, a pair of heavy steel handcuffs already dangling loosely from his right hand. Brad vaulted completely out of his leather chair, stumbling backward until his spine slammed hard against the floor-to-ceiling window. He looked wildly around the massive room, his chest heaving with sheer panic, realizing there was absolutely no exit. Megan remained frozen in her seat, Her perfectly painted lips parted in silent, suffocating horror. "Nobody move!" The homicide detective barked, his rough voice filling the room with undeniable authority. "Bradley Sullivan and Megan Sullivan, do not take another step. You are completely surrounded." Victor stepped forward, walking directly to the head of the conference table. He carried a small, encrypted digital tablet in his hand. He did not look at them. He looked at me, giving a sharp, definitive nod. I stopped trembling instantly. I straightened my spine, rolling my shoulders back, shedding the frail, confused persona I had painstakingly maintained for agonizing days. I looked directly at my son, my expression hardening into absolute unyielding stone. "You thought I was a clueless old man, Brad," I said, my voice resonating with cold, devastating clarity. "You thought you could hollow out my mind and steal my entire life. But you made one fatal miscalculation. You vastly underestimated the man who gave you everything." Victor tapped the glowing screen of his tablet. The massive flat-screen monitor mounted on the boardroom wall instantly flickered to life. The high-definition video fed directly from the hidden camera in their kitchen began to play. The room watched in dead silence as the crystal-clear footage showed Megan meticulously opening my heart medication capsules, injecting them with the clear, deadly liquid from her syringe, and carefully resealing them. Megan let out a piercing, hysterical scream, covering her face with her shaking hands. But Victor was not finished. He tapped the screen a second time. The horrifying audio from their midnight argument blasted through the surround sound speakers. Megan's cold, psychopathic voice filled the room, clearly and proudly confessing to the slow, agonizing murder of her own father for his $3 million estate, and outlining the exact timeline for my impending assassination. The audio echoed relentlessly against the mahogany walls, a damning, inescapable chorus of their absolute depravity. Brad dropped to his knees, sliding down the glass window, weeping uncontrollably into his hands. The illusion was completely shattered. The polished, wealthy executives were permanently gone, replaced by two cornered, desperate murderers trapped in a nightmare entirely of their own making. The boardroom very quickly descended into absolute, total chaos. Megan leapt from her seat, her chair crashing backward against the mahogany wall, her psychopathic composure completely shattered. Pointing a trembling finger at my son, she shrieked hysterically. "He forced me to do it," she screamed, her eyes darting frantically between the federal agents and the homicide detective. "I never wanted to hurt anyone. He said the syndicate would murder us if I did not help him. He is a monster. He threatened my life. He made me poison my father, and he made me target you. I just wanted to survive his massive debts. Please, you have to believe me. I am a victim here." Brad stared at his wife, his mouth opening and closing in absolute paralyzing disbelief. The woman who had engineered two perfect murders, who had slapped him hours earlier for showing weakness, was now throwing him under the bus to save herself. His mind, already fracturing under the weight of the federal ambush, completely snapped. He lunged toward her, a guttural cry of pure betrayal tearing from his throat. The two federal agents moved with blinding speed. They intercepted Brad before he could take 3 steps, slamming him face first into the massive conference table. The heavy wood groaned under his weight. The homicide detective swiftly secured Megan, ratcheting cold steel handcuffs tightly around her wrists. Her designer handbag spilled, scattering cosmetics next to the evidence of her crimes. Brad struggled weakly against the firm grip of the federal agents. Turning his head sideways against the mahogany, his desperate eyes locked onto mine. "Dad." He choked out, his voice a pathetic whine. "Dad, please. You have to stop this. Tell them to stop. We are family. I am your son. You cannot let them take me to federal prison. I will do anything you want. I will go to a rehabilitation clinic. I will work for you forever, for free. Just please show some mercy. I made a terrible mistake, but I can fix it. Do not throw my life away." I sat perfectly still, absorbing the sheer cowardice of his pleas. Then, moving with a deliberate, terrifying calmness, I placed my hands flat on the table and pushed myself up. I did not lean on the table for support. I did not hunch my shoulders. The violent tremors that had plagued my hands for days instantly vanished. The vacant stare evaporated from my eyes, replaced by a piercing clarity. I stood up to my full height, shedding the confused old man persona like a discarded costume. I adjusted the lapels of my wool suit, feeling the raw, undeniable power of my own survival coursing through my veins. I was not a victim. I was Rick Sullivan, the man who built an empire, and I was entirely in control. I walked slowly around the edge of the conference table, my footsteps echoing with heavy, measured authority. The federal agents stepped back slightly, giving me clear access to my son. Brad looked up at me from his knees, his eyes wide with a sudden, horrifying realization. He was not looking at a vulnerable senior citizen anymore. He was looking at the architect of his absolute destruction. "You do not understand the definition of family, Brad," I said, my voice resonating with cold, devastating finality. "Family does not spike their father's medication with industrial antifreeze. Family does not drink expensive wine while plotting a murder to cover up financial failures. You wanted my $12 million legacy so desperately that you were willing to erase my mind to get it. But you made a monumental miscalculation. I am not dead, I am not incompetent, and you will never touch my money." Brad sobbed a wretched, hollow sound. "Dad, I am so sorry." "Your sorrow is completely irrelevant," I continued. "While you and your wife were celebrating your impending wealth, I was executing a final maneuver. Jonathan and I finalized a legal document early yesterday evening. Every single asset I own and the entirety of my $12 million retirement fund has been transferred into a blind, irrevocable trust. It is completely locked down. I no longer own those assets, meaning nobody can ever coerce me into signing them away. Even if you had secured the power of attorney today, it would be completely worthless. You would have inherited absolutely nothing." Brad stared at me, the last remaining flicker of hope extinguishing from his eyes. His entire fraudulent existence, the murders, the lies, the betrayal, had all been for absolutely nothing. He was completely bankrupt, headed to federal prison for decades, and had permanently lost the father who once loved him. The homicide detective pulled Brad up from the floor, securing his wrists tightly behind his back. "It is time to go," Bradley the detective stated roughly. Before they could march him out of the boardroom, I raised my hand. The agents paused, granting me one final moment. I stepped incredibly close to Brad. I leaned in, bringing my mouth directly next to his ear so that only he could hear my parting words. He smelled of cold sweat and absolute terror. "You told Silas and his syndicate that you would have their $4 million by next week," I whispered, my voice a soft, lethal hum. "You promised them my money to save your own life. But since you no longer have access to my estate, I felt it was my moral obligation to inform your creditors of your current financial situation." Early this morning, Victor sent a fully encrypted message directly to Silas. "We provided him with your complete insolvency report, your bankruptcy filings, and a detailed summary of your impending federal incarceration." Brad let out a sharp, suffocated gasp, his body going entirely rigid against the grip of the federal agents. "They know you do not have their money, Brad." I continued, letting the horrifying truth sink deep into his shattered mind. "They know you are going into the federal prison system, and from what Victor tells me, the syndicate has a very extensive, very violent reach behind bars. They do not forgive debts, and they certainly do not forgive broken promises. When you walk into that cell block, they will be waiting for you. You tried to give me a death sentence, son. Now you can go serve yours." I pulled back, looking at his pale, terrified face one last time. There was no love left in my heart for him. He was a predator caught in his own trap. I turned away, not looking back, as the agents dragged him and his screaming wife down the corridor. I shook hands with Jonathan and Victor. I gathered my winter coat, buttoning it against the cold. I walked out of the law firm, stepping into the elevator. The ride down was silent. The brass doors slid open, and I walked confidently into the freezing Chicago air. The wind bit against my cheeks. I took a deep, cleansing breath, filling my lungs with crisp oxygen. The toxic fog was permanently gone. I had faced the ultimate betrayal and emerged victorious. I pulled my coat tighter and began to walk down the city sidewalk a free man.
I used to ride upon your shoulders, thinking you could touch the sky. Every road felt less uncertain when I saw the world through your eyes. You were stronger than the mountains, taller than the northern pines. And when the winter winds were coming, you would stand between them and I. Time kept moving like the river, years slipped slowly out to sea. But no matter where life took me, you were always part of me. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. You taught me strength is not in power, but in kindness when it's hard. You taught me how to keep on going when the road grows cold and dark. Every lesson, every story, every laugh around the flame lies within me like an echo, calling softly through my name. And when I face my greatest battles, when I feel I can't go on, I can hear your voice beside me saying, child, you're stronger than you know. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. One day the snow will cover footprints, one day the fire will burn low. But the things a father gives his daughter are the things that never go. Not the gold or not the stories, not the battles that he won, but the quiet way he loved her and the woman she becomes. I am my father's daughter, and I always will remain. Through every triumph, every loss, through every joy and every pain, the world may change around me, the stars may fade above, but I will always carry with me my father's endless love. And when they ask me who I am, I'll smile and answer softly, I am